Archaic Records.
Hey, what's up, everybody? It's Archaic Records here with you again. My name is Jamie, coming to you from Nashville, Tennessee. Here to welcome you into episode number 145. Today we are going to be taking a quick look at a record that, to be perfectly honest with you, I had completely forgotten about. In fact, I would go as far as to say that never in a million years did I think that this was a record that I would be bringing onto the channel. That is until a couple of days ago, when I was out at one of my local record stores and I stumbled upon this CD, peacefully resting in one of the used bins for just a couple of bones. And I remember immediately upon seeing its artwork just being confronted by this flood of memories that I have associated with this record. Now, the band is a Seattle band called Wiretaps, and this record is entitled Recording. Get it? Wiretaps, Recording? Man, you can't buy wit like that, my friends. Anyway, the Wiretaps formed in Seattle, Washington in 1996. In 1997, the band released its first single, Call Waiting, and in 1999, the band released its first album, Recording, which is around the same time that I first discovered this band. I first discovered Wiretaps, I would say, probably in early to mid 2000. Now, in September of 1999, I moved to Seattle from the Bay Area, and immediately upon arriving in Seattle, I began working a myriad of 50-hour-a-week minimum wage jobs until probably mid-2000, through the help of a friend, I secured employment at a local barbershop in the University District as basically the shop bitch. Now, shop bitch wasn't the technical term for my job title. That was just the affectionate term that was given to me by my coworkers. Basically, what I was a receptionist, and as the receptionist of this barbershop, my duties included greeting clients, checking people in and checking people out, taking care of retail and inventory, sweeping and shop sanitation, basically making sure that all of the trains were running on time. Now, one of the biggest duties in terms of my job description was making sure that music was being played, being in charge of the music that was being played, more or less acting as if the shop DJ. Now, me being me, when I first began working at this barbershop, I thought that this was going to be the aspect of the job that I was going to love the most, but much to my chagrin, this became my most hated aspect of this job. It was something that I began to dread. It was something that even on my way to work in the morning, sometimes the thought of it would just create a knot in my stomach, because most of the people that I worked with there were not necessarily the nicest people in the world. This was, for lack of a better term, this was a hipster barbershop. Now, I realize that the term hipster is sort of dead in 2025 because it has just been beaten to death in our modern vernacular, but I would say that it was definitely a hipster barbershop. There was a lot of attitude among the people that worked there. People there were very opinionated, especially when it came to music. There tended to be a lot of drama in the workplace. I'm not exactly sure if you've ever worked in the beauty industry, but I can tell you from personal experience that a lot of people that work in the beauty industry tend to be a little bit dramatic, very opinionated, very sort of in love with themselves, and that was sort of the case with most of the people that I worked at the barbershop in Seattle. Now, keep in mind, this is pre-Spotify, this is pre-Apple Music, this is even pre-iPods, and the music that I had to work with in the shop consisted of about 50 or 60 CDs that were owned by the barbershop, and I could basically pick and choose anything that I wanted to listen to. Now, apart from that, all of the employees were invited, if not totally encouraged, to bring in their own CDs in case there was anything they wanted to hear, in case they basically got burnt out on the music that we played in heavy rotation on the barbershop. Now, like I said before, the shop had about 50 or 60 CDs that were always there, CDs that you could pick and choose from, but I would say about 45 to 50 of those CDs were CDs that everybody hated, nobody ever wanted to listen to. So you basically had 5 or 6, maybe 7 CDs that you had to actually work with that the shop owned. Ones that would sort of create a peaceful environment, because that was one of the things about the people that worked in that shop, was they were all extremely opinionated, especially about music, and if you played something that they didn't like, they were going to jump all over you like a hair shirt. So it became almost like in a science to sort of pick the music that was going to be played in the shop, because I knew if I picked this CD right here, these 2 people over here were going to be happy, but these 4 people over here would want to revolt, and then I would pick the next CD. 2 of these people over here would think that it was acceptable, while 4 of these people over here were throwing me dagger eyes. It just became a thing that I hated. It was something that created a lot of conflict. People would jump all over me about it. People would jump all over each other about it. And it just became a thing that I did not want to deal with. Now, when I first started working there, I would occasionally bring in my own CDs, stuff that I wanted to hear, stuff that I thought would go over in the shop. Now, 9 times out of 10, the stuff that I picked was stuff that was vetoed outright. So it even got to the point to where I quit bringing in CDs, because I just didn't want to hear people bitching about the music that I liked. And every time I would put on a CD and everybody would start crying and complaining about it, I'd tell them, hey, please, God, please, for the love of God, bring in music. I'll play anything. I don't care. Help me out. This is something I get so tired of thinking about. It's like an adult thinking about what you're going to have for dinner every night. This was my conundrum when it came to the music in this barbershop, but nobody ever brought in their own music. All they wanted to do was bitch and complain about the music that I was playing. Well, let me backtrack. I should not say that nobody brought in music. I would say about 90 to 95% of the people that worked there refused to bring in music, but there were 2 people that consistently did bring in their own CDs. Now, ironically, these were the 2 people that nobody wanted to hear the music that they brought into play, but they were the 2 people that always brought in music, and it was shop policy that if you brought in music, you could have it played. I mean, it was my job to make sure that music was played and everybody got a turn and everybody was as happy as they possibly could be. Now, the first girl that used to bring in music was a lovely girl. She was one of my favorite co-workers. I mentioned before that a lot of the people I worked with there were not very nice, especially to me, especially at the very beginning of my time there. Now, as time went on and people got to know me a little bit better, things became a little bit more cordial, but this girl was very nice to me right away. She was a sweetheart. She was super nice. She was always positive. She was always upbeat. She didn't really create a lot of drama, but she would always bring in, every single day, she would bring in her book of CDs. Now, the style of music that she liked was not something that I was very knowledgeable about, something that I'm still, to this day, not very knowledgeable about. She was very much into techno music. I realized that there's 800 different subcategories of techno music, none of which I know anything about. All I know is that whenever she would put in a CD, it was basically that boom-ch, 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 and that was basically the best way I know how to describe it. I don't know what subcategory that is. To me, I'm sorry to say this, it basically all sounds the same. Now, that music isn't necessarily music that I'm a fan of. It's certainly not music that I know anything about. But at the end of the day, it's music that I can at least sort of ignore. But she would come in every day with her book of CDs, and it was basically all this style of music. She basically just listened to electronic rave music, and she would pull out 4 or 5 CDs, and she would lay them out on the desk, and she would say, okay, well, first, I think we'll start with this. I think this will set a nice sort of mood for the beginning of the day. And then after that, I think we'll transition into this because I think it's a nice, smooth transition. These albums are sort of similar, but different enough to where it will create a little bit of contrast. And she would have this whole sort of storyboard planned out for these CDs that she wanted to hear. And I would tell her, I'd say, hey, look, I appreciate your bringing in music. You're one of my favorite coworkers. I can't possibly say a bad word about you, but you know what? You see all these people out here, these people we work with, these people are assholes, man. They don't want to hear this techno stuff. When I put on one of these CDs, they bitch and cry to me the whole time. So there's no way, I'm sorry. There's no way I'm going to play 4 or 5 of these CDs in a row. There's just no way, because at the end of the day, I'm the one that's going to have to face execution when it comes to these people that we work with. So pick one now. I'll play it, and then I'll mix some other stuff in, and sure, I'll get to a couple others as we go along. And inevitably, she would end up pouting. She would end up feeling as if I was playing favorites against her. But at the end of the day, the people that worked there, man, they did not want to hear that techno rave club music. Now, I didn't mind hearing it. Like I said, it was something that if I was playing a CD that somebody else brought in, it was something that I didn't have to think about. It was something that made my life easier. I don't want to sit there and listen to that shit either. But nobody else was helping us out with the music, so I would do that. I would play her music. Now, the other guy that always brought in music was an interesting guy, I would say, in my... between being a shop bitch and working on the other side of the counter. I've been working in the barbershop industry for 25 years. This was probably one of the most interesting people I've ever worked with in an industry filled with interesting people. This guy, to say that he was a right-winger is not even really doing it justice. This guy was as out there as anybody I've ever met. Now, in 2025, the political climate that we live in now, I would say that this guy was probably a little bit more mainstream in 2025 than he was in 2000, but he was a right-wing nut. He was a total conspiracist, and the ironic thing was the company that we worked for was not only a very hipster sort of barbershop, but it was a gay-owned company. It was a very left-leaning progressive company, and I always sort of thought it was interesting that they hired this guy to work there, not because he wasn't talented, because he was. In fact, in my 25 plus years of working in the barbershop industry, I would say that he was, technically one of the most talented barbers that I ever worked with ever. Now, I don't know what that's worth to you. Saying that somebody is the greatest barber you've ever seen, or one of the greatest barbers you've ever seen, may not carry a lot of weight in your world, but this guy was just nuts. He was somebody that was a total conspiracist, and during my days there, at least working on that sort of side of the desk, on days when he was slow, he would end up sitting behind the desk with me, and he would just get into these conversations about all of this stuff that I had no interest in, and stuff, to be perfectly honest with you, I did not want to be heard discussing out loud in public. I always say the same thing when it comes to people that I work with. If you want to have these opinions and you want to discuss them in the privacy of your own house, that's fine. But I don't necessarily want to have these conversations while we're out having dinner in public, or while I'm at work with my coworkers overhearing the conversations that we're having. But this guy had no filter. I mean, I worked at this barbershop in this capacity through 9/11, and you should have seen this guy. You should have heard the stuff this guy said post 9/11. He was out there. I mean, he was nuts. And there's nuts in a good way, and there's nuts in not a good way, and he was sort of nuts not in a good way, but he was somebody that sort of fancied himself as a music lover, and he was one of the few people in those days that would actually bring in CDs. Now, I gotta tell you, having no real love affair for the techno rave, music that the other coworker used to bring in, her music was a million times better than the music that this guy brought in, because he would bring in bands that was literally some of the worst stuff that I've ever heard. And it was stuff that my coworkers literally used to bust a spoke over. I mean, this guy would bring in bands like Creed and Puddle of Mud, and he was way in on the whole new metal thing, Korn and Limp Bizkit and System of a Down, and just all of just the worst music that I've ever heard. Now, at the time, I would say that new metal stuff was very popular. I think it's becoming popular again. I don't quite understand why that is. I think it's because of the garbaging of our society, but I've noticed that a lot of young people are getting way into Korn and Slipknot and System of a Down and Limp Bizkit. I don't understand that at all. But back in 1999 and 2000, that stuff was, I would say, probably at the height of its popularity, and this guy was all in on it. Now, the other people that worked in that barbershop, fortunately at least, were not into that style of music. They thought it was the worst thing ever. Now, as if bringing in Korn and Limp Bizkit and Flaw and Slipknot wasn't bad enough, this guy was very serious about his faith. Now, I'm not sitting here picking on people of faith. I'm not necessarily one of you, but if it makes your life more inhabitable, if it brings you pleasure, I'm all on board. But this guy was very serious about his faith. And so he would also bring in the sort of Christian versions of bands like Korn and Slipknot and Limp Bizkit. And keep in mind, this was a very liberal barbershop owned by 3 gay guys. And the manager of the shop one time pulled me aside, and without saying this guy's name, he said, "Hey, look, you cannot play his Christian CDs. If he brings in Puddle of Mud or Disturbed or Slipknot, that's fine. We can play that. But the owners have told me that they don't want us playing Christian music in the shop. It has to be secular music." I mean, come on. I don't think that that's too much to ask, but he put the task on me of telling this guy, "Hey, man, I can't play any of your Christian CDs. If you want to bring in the other stuff, that's fine. We'll play it for you. But honestly, I just can't do the Christian stuff. The managers told me not to play it. It's coming in from ownership. Nobody wants to hear that crap, man. Nobody wants to hear that crap." As Hank Hill once said, Christian rock doesn't make Jesus any cooler. It just makes music bad. Okay? And that is a theory that I subscribe to as well. Now, the guy, to his credit, I will say, he sort of shrugged off the Christian thing. He's like, "All right, I understand that. I don't love it, but I can just bring in other CDs and that's fine." And so for a while, we got along okay with those sort of ground rules. Now, one day, he came in and he had a CD that was a blank burned CD, and it had a bunch of stuff written on it. And of course, I couldn't tell what it was because it was basically a blank CD. Now, one thing I did not know about this guy until this day was apparently he was a big-time karaoke singer around Seattle. He had his places that he would always go. Now, there was one place in particular, and I'm not exactly sure what place this was. I think it was a place in North Seattle called the Rickshaw. I think that's what he told me, because the Rickshaw was a place in North Seattle that had a very sort of famous karaoke night, and it was a karaoke night. I'm not a karaoke guy at all. I'm not somebody that enjoys going to see karaoke. I've never in my life sung karaoke. I've done a lot of dumb stuff in my life, I can assure you. If it's something stupid, I've probably done it, but I've never done karaoke, and it's not something that I plan on starting anytime soon. But this guy was a big-time karaoke guy, and there's this place in Seattle. I think this is where he did it. A place called the Rickshaw had a really famous karaoke night. It's where a lot of the serious karaoke people went. But I guess, as a part of their karaoke night, as you were singing, they had a device on their karaoke machine that would burn your performance onto a CD, and then they'd give it to you, and you could collect it, and you could keep adding to it. And over time, this guy had compiled a CD of songs. I think it was like 12 or 13 songs of him singing karaoke. And it was him singing karaoke to this same music. The worst shit that I've ever heard in my life. Stuff like Puddle of Mud and Disturbed and Limp Bizkit and Creed and things like that. So he brings in this CD one day. And I'm pretty much willing to play anything as long as it's not Christian music. I was given those guidelines. And I look at it and I ask myself, okay, what's this? Not saying I'm not going to play it. I just want to know what I'm getting in for. Because again, we got to work with all these assholes, man. And I have to be able to defend what I'm playing. I at least have to know what it is. Because if they don't like it, they're not going to be shooting daggers at you, son. They're going to be shooting daggers at me. And he told me. He said, this is me singing karaoke. And at first I thought he was joking. Or at least I should say, I hoped he was joking. I said, are you serious? He said, yeah, you go to this place, and I think it was the Rickshaw, and they have a CD, and they'll burn it for you, and then I have this album of songs I've compiled of myself singing karaoke. And I remember asking him, and I'm not a confrontational person at all. I asked him, I said, are you serious right now? You really want me to play this CD of you singing karaoke to these people that we work with? You know these people, man. They don't like you. They barely tolerate me, but I know for a fact they don't like you because you're some right-wing nut. You're always out there shopping your conspiracies around. They don't want to hear this. Are you serious? I can't do this, man. I cannot play the CD of you singing karaoke. It's just impossible. And of course, he gets indignant. He says, it's my turn. This is what I want to hear. I was told I could have a turn. This isn't Christian music. And I told him, I said, okay, man, you win. All right, I'm going to play your CD, singing karaoke. But I will tell you right now, you get 3 strikes. I hear 3 complaints about this CD, and I'm turning it off, and I'm never playing it again. Because I don't want to hear it, and I know these people don't want to hear it. And more than that, I don't want to hear their bitching. He's like, no, man, it's good. I'm really good. They're going to like it. I'm great. He thought he was like the king of karaoke. Like, that matters. So I put on the CD, and oh my God. You might think you've heard the worst thing of all time. You haven't. Unless you were in that shop on that day. You have not heard the worst thing that I've ever heard. The worst thing I've ever heard beats the worst thing you've ever heard. Because this CD of this young gentleman singing karaoke was, it was not even funny. You would want to laugh. You would want to laugh because of how horrendous it was, but it wasn't even funny. And I got to tell you, that CD didn't even make it through one song. Now, as a courtesy, I think I finished one song because everybody looked at me and basically in stereo were like, what in the fuck is this? No, you cannot play this, whatever this is. And I think I made it through one song, and maybe two tops, and I stopped it. And the guy came over, and he was very upset with me, and I told him, I was like, dude, I told you I was going to give it a chance, but as soon as I started getting grief, I can't do it, because I'm not accepting grief for you. I accept grief enough for myself. I'm not accepting your grief, man. And he became indignant, and I remember the rest of the day, he was sort of over at his station pouting and giving me dirty looks. Now, I think the one good thing that came out of this, listening to his karaoke CD, the one good thing that came out of it was he never really forgave me for turning it off. In fact, the guy never really talked to me much after that again. And eventually, he ended up quitting and moving on to a different barbershop. But man, going back, thinking about listening to that karaoke CD again, I think it just took 3 years off of my life. Now, where this CD comes in, Wiretaps recording, is, like I mentioned before, there were about 6 or 7 CDs in the shop that generally went over pretty well. They were CDs that basically got played over and over and over again, and this was one of them. This was a CD that the shop had that basically everybody agreed on, everybody liked. So this was a CD that between probably 2000 and 2002, I listened to probably 2, 3, maybe even sometimes 4 albums a day. Now, at a certain point in time, I graduated from that position in the barbershop to the other side of the desk and began working as a barber, and it was the same thing when the new receptionist started. Everybody always fought about the music. Now, being in that position, being in the position of the person that has to be in charge of the music and has to listen to the belly aching constantly by a bunch of over opinionated dramatic hairdressers, I made it a point to, as much as possible, not complain about the music, because I knew that it was just the part of the job that stunk the most. Now, there were a couple of times that I would throw some shitty opinions out there if they were playing stuff that I really hated, but it's funny, that is the association that I have with this record. So when I saw this record in one of my used CD stores the other day, I basically felt as if I had no choice but to purchase it based on nostalgia, if nothing else. I mean, this to me is something that basically has to be, at this point in time, has to be a museum piece. And I brought it home and immediately I put it on. Now, keep in mind, I've not listened to this record in probably over 20 years, but I brought it home and I put it on the CD player, and immediately, based on the fact that I'd heard this album so many times for so long, I still basically knew this album by heart. Now, I don't know every lyric to every song, but as soon as I put this record on and started playing it, it just hit me. I mean, it's interesting to me. It's funny that music is such a, hearing and music is such a memory inducing thing, because, man, I put this record on and I was immediately back in that spot, in that barbershop, sitting behind that desk, listening to people bitch and complain and bellyache. And I got to tell you, I've been listening to this record over the last few days, and, man, I actually do still enjoy it. It is a fun record. Now, there are a few other CDs that I do always associate with that same time, because they were, again, like I said, there were like 6 or 7 CDs that got played just over and over and over again. For some reason, the people that worked there never really got tired of them. They never really complained about them. But some of the other CDs I always associate with that sort of point in time is the first La Tigre album, which was just huge at that point in time, and everybody loved it. I loved it even back in those days. And that was another record that got played, 2-3 times a day, every single day for years. Now, that first La Tigre record is a record that I love. In fact, that's a record that I do plan on bringing onto the channel at some point in time, because it is a favorite of mine. But after sort of leaving that position at that job, that was another record that I didn't listen to for probably 5 or 6 years, because it just had worn me out. Now, I went back and bought my own copy of that record at a certain point in time, and I love it. There's another album by a band that got played a lot. This was a terrible band, a band called Alien Crime Syndicate. They were a really shitty Seattle indie band. I remember that was a CD that I just couldn't even deal with back in those days. Now, this album I liked at the time. I liked the La Tigre album a lot, but one of the things I had to do when it came to that job was I would have to leave the shop a lot, and I would have to go out and do the laundry at a laundromat, and I'd have to go pick up supplies for the shop. And I'd always play that album by the band Alien Crime Syndicate if I had to leave the shop, because, man, that was one band that I just can't even deal with. I actually went back on Spotify recently to listen to a little bit of Alien Crime Syndicate after, actually, it was just recently, because it was after I found this CD in one of my record stores, and I wanted to hear the Alien Crime Syndicate because I was in this sort of memory of working that job, and, man, those guys still stink. Another band that was popular at that time was Yo La Tengo. I remember we listened to that album all the time. The album was Riot on an Empty Street. That was the one that we used to play all the time. People loved that. There was another sort of, I don't want to say lesser known band, but there was a band called Kings of Convenience that were an indie band that were pretty popular at the time. I remember the current album that we would play over and over again was an album called Quiet is the New Loud. That was an album that people liked for some reason. But in 2000, Karen Palmer, who was the singer of the band Wiretaps, she moved to New York City and basically left the bassist Lisa Rickenberg left her to take over lead vocals, which on this record, which has 14 songs on it, Lisa Rickenberg does the lead vocals on 4 of the songs anyway. So this is a band I never got a chance to see live, a band that, I do enjoy. Like I said before, this is an album that I have such a personal association with working that shop. I've been listening to it, over the last few days, and check it out if you've never heard it. It's fun. It's not a bad record. This record sort of, I would say that it has a lot of sort of different elements to it. I think it contains elements of indie, surf punk, post punk, new wave, riot girl, art pop, post pop. I like the band. They're brash, they're snotty, they're clanky, they're poppy. Kind of all the elements of stuff that I like, especially for pop punk or sort of post pop. So check out this record if you haven't heard it. It's definitely fun. It always reminds me of my time living in Seattle. Now, I moved out of Seattle in 2012, and I've only been back to Seattle a couple times in the past 13 years. It's a city that I still consider to be one of my homes. I lived there for about 13 years, more or less. Now, the 2 times I've been back to Seattle since I left in 2012, Seattle's another one of those cities that's changed so much since I lived there that, it doesn't even really feel the same as it used to. I think a lot of that has to do with the tech industry. I think you could say the same thing certainly about San Francisco, which I'm much more familiar with, Austin, Texas. I don't know what it is about the tech people when they move to these cool cities. They move to cities like San Francisco and Seattle and Austin, cities that are amazing, that have this culture and artistic vibrancy, and they come in and they just ruin it. I don't know if it's a conscious effort, if they decide they just want to whitewash and sterilize everything upon their arrival, but I think that is something that's happened in Seattle. So when I go back to visit, the couple times I have, it doesn't even feel like the same city that it used to. In fact, my wife and I, a couple times over the past 13 years or so, there's been a couple of times that her and I have come pretty close to moving back to Seattle, but at the end of the day, it's something that we've always sort of hedged on. For one thing, I do have a lot of great memories in Seattle. I knew a lot of amazing people up there, but I also have a lot of really shitty memories. There's a couple people in particular, if I ever went back to Seattle, there's a couple people, maybe one in particular, that I would sort of live in mortal fear of running into. And Seattle's like any other city. Once you live there long enough, it begins to feel like a small town, and you begin to see people everywhere while you're out. And there's a person in particular that, man, if I ran into them in public, I would probably soil my trunks, son. So, although we've thought about it, at this point in time, it's something I don't really see happening. My wife and I own a house in Nashville now, and Nashville is actually a really nice place to live. There are times when I am capable of busting Nashville's balls, but Nashville is a really nice place to live, especially if you are a music fan. And honestly, looking back on it, I'm not necessarily proud of the person that I was sometimes in Seattle. I was definitely not the best version of myself when I lived there. I mean, at the end of the day, it's difficult to be the best version of yourself when your lips are permanently attached to a beer keg as if it was a giant barley-filled teat. I definitely think I'm a much better version of myself living out here in Nashville. But if you have not checked out this album or the band Wiretaps, I would definitely check out this album recording. Like I said, it's fun. For me, it is a flood of memories of a job looking back on now that I actually had a lot of fun doing, despite the fact that I had to referee a bunch of fighting all the time, especially when it came to the music. Now, I was looking this band up on Spotify recently, over the last couple days, and apparently they released a second album, an album called Static Resurrection. Now, according to Spotify, I don't know if this is true, but according to Spotify, the record came out in 2009. I have not gone back and listened to it yet, but I plan on listening to it actually over the next couple days. I have a lot of stuff between books and music. I'm sort of backlogged on stuff that I want to get into, but based on the fact that I just recently rediscovered this album and have enjoyed it, honestly, I've really enjoyed it. Has a lot of good songs on it. I'm definitely going to go back and a certain point in time, probably this week, maybe next week, I will check out their album, Static Resurrection. I like it. I like this one at least, anyway. Anyway, man, thank you so much for checking out this video. This is Archaic Records. My name is Jamie, coming at you from Nashville, Tennessee. Be sure to go out and support your local record store like Black Rose in Huntsville, Alabama. Check back for Morrissey Monday, a celebration of all things Morrissey and the Smiths, as well as other record content and album reviews throughout the week. And I'm feeling pretty good right now about this, so unless you've got anything you'd like to add, any memories you have about the band Wiretaps recording 1999? No, you're good? All right, well, in that case, until next time, my friends, talk to you then.